Alright, good evening folks, it's Enforcer Matt and welcome back to another Short War video, and today we have very big news coming out of central Moscow. Because this morning we've seen Ukrainian forces launched a major drone attack on central Moscow, and it looks like they actually struck the route where Putin usually takes to the Kremlin, which is a very big move. And also we've seen that military training bases around the city of Moscow have been struck as well, and we have all that footage to show you today, and that is a very big story. We also have big news as well that apparently in Tuapse, Russia, the Ukrainians also sent in a brand new weapon that they domestically produced called the Peklo to strike the oil refinery in Tuapse, and right now that facility is burning to the ground, and it looks like those brand new Ukrainian missiles are very potent as the facility has been destroyed quite badly. So we also have news on a diplomatic front that we have gotten a US response to Russia's rejection of the ceasefire yesterday that Ukraine had already agreed to, and we also have a Ukrainian response as well to it, and we also have reports that Russia is not willing to give in and stop the war anytime into the future, according to the US's own intel that they released today. But jumping into our first post, this one goes to Anton Gerashenko. And this is a very big story right here. For about the second time in just a few days, we've heard that Russian media has reported a drone attack on Moscow this morning, and reportedly a drone fell very close to the route that Putin usually takes to the Kremlin, and drone attacks on Russia are becoming increasingly more frequent and massive, and it turns out that even the most air defense dense Moscow, which is of course where most of Russia's air defense is in the central of Moscow, it turns out it's actually not fully protected by air defense. Who would have known that? And also oil depots and refineries are also not protected as well, and they are hit almost daily, and there are grounds to believe that it's not just an increase in the number of drones, but also using new types of drones, including missile drones as well, which could include the Peklo missile and other domestically Ukraine-produced weaponry as well. So we're seeing a big uptick in these attacks, and we've seen that specifically on Moscow, like I had mentioned. But let's take a look at the video and see some of these attacks happening in central Moscow. And as you can see, a very densely packed street. And there it is, a hit right there in the distance. This is literally on the route, allegedly, to where Putin goes to the Kremlin. So this is quite a situation. And as you can see, a very densely packed street here where this struck. So a very big hit right there. And also, just to give you an idea of exactly where this was, this orange little line here is the route that Putin usually takes to the Kremlin. That's where he goes. And as you can see, there's a target right there. That is where one of the drones struck. And also there's another target at the bottom where some more drones struck as well. And there were also more drones that were struck in other areas, but it's not marked here on the map. But as you can see, very, very close to Putin's route that he usually takes into Moscow. So very big news on that one. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to Null Reports. And in this post right here, we have another video showing some of the footage from this attack of central Moscow. And we actually have a video here showing some type of weaponry. It looks like a disposed piece of weaponry laying on the ground after this attack had concluded. So let's take a look and see what it is. Okay, so here we see it. It's a road here in central Moscow, very close to that last video I showed you. There's some type of missile or some type of drone missile system, or maybe even an air defense missile laying right here in the middle of the road. I'm really not sure what that is, but as you can see, something clearly came out of the sky after this attack, and it's laying right there next to where that explosion was heard. And I'm not sure if that's from the Russian side or from the Ukrainian side, but the civilians are checking it out. In fact, one person might be getting out of their vehicle to go and take it home with them. There's no telling. It's Russia, of course, but as you can see, right there in the middle of the road, and causing a bit of a stir there in that part of Moscow, but very big news. But guess what? These were not the only strikes in Moscow. We also had another post here. This one goes to Tendar, where we saw that the Ukrainian UAVs also struck the Russian barracks of Molino in the Moscow military district. So let's take a peek and see what happened. All right, you can hear it. There it is right there coming in. As you can see, the Ruski walking off screen on his phone, not bothered one bit by this. And there it comes in. Oh, final descent. Those things really speed up fast when they really hit the target, but as you can see, it hit the military barracks right there, and most of the soldiers were actually walking away from the building. They were actually not too bothered by it, actually, indicating that this was not a surprise. So as you can see, a big hit right there, and proving once again, not much air defense around the military training facilities, because of course, the troops are not the primary concern of Russia. It's Putin's palaces that are much more important than that. So the military troops get no defense forces, but of course, they do have a drone hitting right there on the top of their roof. So very interesting to see. But with that that, we are now moving on to our next post here, and this one goes to Anton Gerashenko once more. And moving away from the Moscow attack, we did see a secondary attack which was being launched on Tuapse inside of Russia in the Krasnodar region. We saw that Russian media reported a large fire at the Tuapse oil refinery last night after a drone attack. And as you can see right here from our first image, it was a big hit. That looks like one of the oil tanks being hit by one of those missile drones coming in. So as you can see, a humongous fire and the entire tank is burning to the ground. A very big one indeed. But we also have a video, so let's take a look at the initial moments of the attack. And there we have it, that oil tank right there on fire, as you can see right here in the video, and a ton of smoke in the air. And reportedly, this fire spread quickly, actually to other areas of the plant. And once again, a very potent hit by the Ukrainian forces using a brand new type of weaponry, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But you know, sometimes it's really hard to tell what's happening at night because, of course, it is very dark outside. So let's see a daytime video of it as well. And this one goes to Austin Technical. And once again, even after the several hours of it being struck, it was still ablaze even in the morning, with one storage tank at least fully engulfed and with the fire spreading pretty quickly. So let's take a look at the daytime photo. It looks like from maybe a train. So let's take a look. So as we can see, it looks like the Russian commuters here are actually on their train taking a look at it. And we have another train video, by the way, showing it a little bit closer up. But as you can see right here, it looks like a very, very large tank right there, right on the side of this facility. And as you can see, it's got the Russians worried. And actually, they're laughing a bit in this video. You can't really hear it right now as I muted it, but they were actually laughing at it because they don't really understand how bad this is for their economy, because they're fed propaganda on a daily basis. But certainly not good for another oil facility to be taken down quite like this. But with that, we are now jumping into our next post here, and this one goes to War Translated. And we do have that second train video, by the way, just to show you the reaction of the Russian public actually in the person right here. You can see it right here. So let's take a look at the video and show you exactly how the Russians are reacting. Oh, and look at that. That's a big one right there. And these people right here were reading a book, but now they can't take their eyes off the screen. They got to see what's happening outside the window right there. And as you can see, it has interrupted the reading of the novel. They're thinking, huh, that's weird. There's a facility being attacked. I thought they had air defense around that stuff, but they're learning that Putin is not exactly a truth teller based on what they're seeing right here out of the window. So very interesting to see once again. And once again, a very fascinating piece of footage showing that large blaze. But jumping into our next post, this one goes to Max24. And something very fascinating about the attack on the Tuapse facility is it turns out that this was actually probably not a normal drone attack. This appears to be an attack with the new Peklo missile that Ukraine has developed domestically within their country. And once again, it's a very unique weapon system. It's a jet-powered drone-style weapon. It's really hard to describe. I'll show you a picture of one in just a moment. But we can see actually the initial moment it was struck. We did find that video, by the way, thanks to Max24, and we have the exact moment in which Tuapse was hit. So I want you to notice in the video, notice the sound of the weapon coming in, and notice it does not really sound like a normal drone. It sounds more of a different sound, but take a look at this and see what you can figure out. And there it was, the hit right there. But as you could see, that sound of it coming in did not sound like the lawnmower sound that we're used to. That sounded like a sort of a jet-powered sound, if you ask me. But it's really hard to tell. But look at that hit, though. That was a lot of munition and ordnance behind that hit. And of course, it did hit an oil tank, so it was going to be a pretty massive explosion anyway. But the initial strike was big. Like, that was a big hit, and that indicates it could be a weapon carrying a lot more munitions than usual. So I have a feeling this probably was the Peklo. Like, I think that is a pretty good assumption right there, and as we can see in the video, very big hit. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to the Kyiv Independent. And this is actually a photo showing the Peklo missile. This is it right here, as you can see in the photo. They are a jet-powered, like, loitering munition, kind of like a cruise missile type deal. It's really hard to describe, but as you can see, there's actually a small jet engine right there on the top of it, and it is a unique style of weapon that Ukraine domestically produces, and this is a weapon they don't have to rely on Western sources to receive it. They can simply build it themselves and start launching them at Russia. So that is what a Peklo is, and there's another photo just giving you more context as to what that weapon could have been. But jumping into our next post here, this one goes to us on Twitter at It's the Enforcer. And we did get some diplomatic news as well on the diplomatic front of things, because we did hear yesterday that Russia outright rejected the ceasefire proposal proposed by the United States and already accepted by the Ukrainian officials. The Russians outright rejected it and said they'll do it on their terms or they'll do it not at all. So today we did get a response from the White House officials today, specifically the U.S. President, president who put out a post on one of these social media platforms, and we have that statement here to cover and break down with you today. So let's take a look at that statement. And right here we have the statement from the U.S. president, and we're actually going to break this down line by line and go through it a piece at a time so we can either say if it's true or false based on the available evidence that we currently have right here on the video. So we can see in the first line, it says, "We had a very good and productive discussion with President Vladimir Putin of Russia yesterday, and there's a very good chance that this horrible bloody war can finally come to an end." And you can see right here in the post, the wording says that we had a good discussion. First of all, there is no we here. The U.S. president was not involved in these discussions, and he was not on the phone with Putin either. So there is no we, and I can back that up here in our next post, which goes to First Squawk. It says the White House says that the U.S. envoy Witkoff, which is the one who went and spoke to Putin, he spoke to him on Thursday, which was yesterday, but the U.S. president did not speak to Putin. So that statement is actually not entirely true, so there is no we here. It's just the envoy speaking to Putin, and that's it. Also, moving on to the next line, it says, "But at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position." That statement is also not really indicative of what's happening on the ground either. We can see here, of course, that he's saying the Ukrainian troops are encircled, and that sounds like something that Putin would have told the envoy that now the U.S. president is repeating, and that is simply not true. That is a piece of Russian propaganda. And obviously, to say the Ukrainians are in a very bad and vulnerable position, that is not true either. And to back these statements up that I'm making right now, we do have a response from the Ukrainian officials right here in this post from Christopher Miller, and the Ukrainian General Staff responded to the U.S. president's comments and said, quote, "Reports of the alleged encirclement of Ukrainian units in the Kursk region do not correspond to reality and are being created by Russians for political purposes and to pressure Ukraine and its partners." So that was the official Ukraine response to these statements by the U.S. president, and once again, we watch the map daily on the front lines. There is no evidence of an encirclement in Kursk. There is evidence of a withdrawal from Kursk, but not an encirclement. So the Russians have no way to actually harm the Ukrainians in the way that's being discussed right here, at least according to the Ukrainians and also according to the maps that we have as well. And moving on to the next line of the statement right here, it says, "I have been strongly requesting to President Putin that their lives be spared," meaning the Ukrainians' lives, "and that this will be a horrible massacre, one not seen since World War II, and God bless them all." So also, by the way, this is not really indicative of the truth either, because it says right here that he's asking Putin to spare the lives, indicating that Putin's in some position to really harm the Ukrainians, which he's not. They've not encircled the Ukrainian troops. Also, he said it would be a horrible massacre. That is not true either. The Russians are using donkeys, and they're also not trained well, and they have very poor weaponry. So there would be no massacre of any Ukrainian troops under any scenario right now in reality on the front lines of Ukraine and also in Kursk as well. So overall, I think the problem with the statement is it's relying on Russian propaganda spoken directly from Vladimir Putin himself to make this statement right here. So it's simply just not indicative of what's really happening. So I'll just leave it at that. But that's the statement from U.S. officials. So moving on from that and on to our next post here, this one goes to War Translated. And keeping in mind the statements made there by the U.S. officials that they have said that they hope that Russia spares the lives of the Ukrainians, the Russians have wasted no time at all capitalizing on that propaganda opportunity right there. And a Russian fighter actually made a video, probably at the behest of Putin, I'd imagine, basically saying that their command, meaning Putin himself, has inexplicably ordered them not to target Ukrainian forces during their withdrawal from Kursk. And once again, I don't believe this for a second, by the way. This is just a propaganda opportunity for the Russians to make it seem like they're appeasing the U.S. officials. So let's look at the statement here, but take it with a grain of salt. So the Russian says, basically, Sudza is taken, the Ukrainians are retreating, and we're told not to touch them, like let them carefully slip out through the fields, but there's 8,000 to 10,000 of them, and I'm just stunned by this war, man. Come on, man. Total BS about money. We can hit them everywhere, shell them, and also he adds, strike them with grads and drones, but commands like, no, don't hit them, let them leave. It's just unreal. So obviously there is a little bit of truth to the statement because, of course, from what we see, it looks like the Ukrainians have withdrawn from Sudza, at least to a large extent. But of course, I think the rest of this is propaganda. This guy's complaining that he wants to hit the Ukrainians on the way out, but his command is telling them, no, Igor, you can't hit them on the way out. Be nice. And he's very mad about that. So honestly, like, I'm going to leave it up to y'all whether or not you believe it. I would say this is probably something they're doing for propaganda reasons, but that's just my assumption. But moving on here to our next post, this one goes to posted the Washington Post. And we have gotten reports today that according to classified U.S. intelligence reports, including one earlier this month as well, it's casting doubt on Putin's willingness to end the war against Ukraine, assessing that the Russian president has not veered from his maximalist goal of dominating his western neighbor, which is Ukraine. So the U.S. intelligence reports have been saying for a very long time that Russia is not willing to end the war because Putin wants to dominate the whole country, and until that happens, he is not going to give up. And we are still seeing that repeated even today in the current U.S. intel reports, so nothing has changed. And that's also our assessment as well, based on what we're seeing, is it looks like Putin is going all the way in, and basically what he's doing right now is trying to buy time with the current U.S. officials to basically avoid really bad sanctions from being slapped on the Russian economy, which could bring the country to the brink. So we're seeing Putin basically do stall tactics to buy time here, so that way his country doesn't collapse. So the U.S. intel does back us up on our assessment. But jumping into our next post here, this one also goes to First Squawk. And it looks like Volodymyr Zelensky also agrees on that as well. He says that Russia is deliberately setting conditions for ceasefire to complicate and drag out the process, and Zelensky says that Russia wants diplomacy aiming to end the war to break down. And that is also our assessment as well. Based on what we're hearing, Putin is not going to entertain a ceasefire unless Ukraine fully capitulates and fully surrenders, which that is not a ceasefire, that is a full surrender, which is something that's not on the table. And I'll be honest, it really didn't take a genius to see this. I think it's pretty obvious, and hopefully everybody comes to their senses sooner than later. But anyways, that is actually our last post of the day. So I hope you found this video informative. Once again, I know there were things discussed in it that might be considered political, but we are taking no political stance here. I just want to reiterate that one more time. We're simply addressing it based on the facts, and that is simply it. I will say this though, repeating Russian propaganda is not a good precedent to set, so hopefully those statements will be corrected at some point. But anyways, folks, please smack the like before you leave, and also subscribe to the channel as well for more daily war updates coming from Ukraine and around the world. And also, if you want to support the channel financially, you can do so on our Patreon page, and there's a link in the description below for Patreon, where you can go over there and sign up for a monthly membership and support the channel that way, which is a massive help. And thank you all once again for signing up for Patreon, because we do appreciate all of our Patreon supporters. But with that, be sure to join us tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern for the next night of War News streams. And with that, bye-bye for now.